Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is your brother Asarimhotep, and we are back at it again this Thursday, June the 11th, 2020, in the middle of the apocalypse, COVID-19, and just police acting crazy. But in the midst of the chaos, there's always these waves of sanity, and we have a force of sanity, a beacon of light in the tunnel of chaos here in the United States and abroad. We are interviewing today Dr. Ifetayo Flannery, and let me do something there. Good. And it is going to be a dynamic show today. So I'd like to welcome everyone who is listening live, and then those, of course, of you who are listening via the archives. So for those of you who are just joining us, please like and share this video, throughout your timeline. Do a watch party if you're on Facebook and YouTube or whatnot. And this will be a very fire, deep, and dynamic program. So again, like and share. And for those of you who are new to this channel, subscribe so that you can get the updates live and direct of when we are having shows and discussions on this channel. So before I bring on our dynamic guest, I just want to tell you a little bit about her. And so I'm reading her biography from the sfsu.edu website. And we'll get to know a little bit more about her as we progress throughout this discussion. So Dr. Flannery is an assistant professor in the Department of Africana Studies at San Francisco State University. She earned her PhD from Temple University in Africology and African American Studies and was a 2016 recipient of the Molefe Kiti Asante's Founders Award. In 2018, Dr. Flannery was awarded the W.B. Du Bois Research Fellowship and served as a visiting scholar to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Dr. Flannery is also a 2020 recipient of the prestigious Presidential Award from San Francisco State University for scholarly research. She serves on the executive board of the DISA, that is the Diopian Institute for Scholarly Advancement International Conference, and as the vice president of the Bay Area chapter of the Association of Black Psychologists. Her publications can be found in a variety of journals and texts, including the Berkeley Journal of African American Law and Policy, Journal of Support Cancer Care, and Qualitative Methods in Africana Studies. She's most recently published an edited book titled An Introduction to Black Psychology. Dr. Flannery's research locates and examines African cultural patterns in the collective consciousness of African diasporic groups, with particular focus on their political orientation, cultural memory, and spiritual beliefs. She has traveled to many countries within the diaspora and the African continent to observe and participate in the distinct ways people of African descent understand their relationship to cosmology, destiny, and cultural tradition. She is an initiated priestess in the Yoruba tradition, religious tradition, Ifa, and carries the name Inyanifa, Ifa Mudupe, Ifetayo Awodele. Through both the deep spiritual paradigm of this African tradition and the institutional structure of Africana Studies, Dr. Flannery seeks to connect the political consciousness of African people with the spiritual wisdom of the African ancestors. So I would like to welcome Dr. Flannery. I need y'all to be giving a round of applause where y'all at in YouTube land. Matter of fact, I need to get one for the show. I keep saying that. I'm gonna get an applause sound effect to put on the show. But welcome, all the way on the west coast of the United States, originally from the boot.
Right.
How are things going? How is your sanity out there?
Well, in California, as you've seen on the news, it's wilding in a good way. So we were one of the first people to get the pandemic. We initiated one of the first largest protests for George Floyd out of LA. So, California is really lit right now. So give thanks to all the people who are in the movement all over the country, all over the world.
Before we start getting into the issues of today, you're new to my channel and a lot of the people in my audience range. So we'd just like to get a little bit of background of who you are, where you're from, and what inspired you to go along the trajectory in terms of training and educational interest.
Thank you, Asar. First, I just want to honor my ancestors that have allowed me to speak. And I hope that today I'll be able to speak truth and courage and speak in a way that will please my guiding spirits that have brought me this far. Ashe. So I am born out of New Orleans, but I always say I'm from Atlanta, ATL, ATLian, 1,000%, because that's who raised me. And interesting enough, Atlanta is always referred to as the Black Mecca and so on. So I did have kind of a curated Black experience in terms of my socialization coming up as a child and so on. And I'm not going to pretend like I was super woke in high school or anything. I was conscious that I was Black like most people in America. But I accidentally, or spirit led me into Africana Studies, which is a different level of consciousness exposure when I was in undergrad. So I went to Georgia State University. Big ups to the Department of African American Studies there. And I was like looking for a class to fulfill humanities, and a guidance counselor was like, why don't you just take Intro to AFAM? And I was like, okay, like I was a biology major. So that basically was the beginning of my next life. So that experience, I heavily will underscore for all people that a specific training in the culture and the tradition of who we are should not be oversighted by social experience. There is a difference between experiential learning and a distinct and unique intentional study. This exposure to African American studies completely transformed my life. It's where I was named Ifetayo, originally through a naming ceremony by by some elders in the community while I was active in that department at Georgia State. And then I was also getting very interested in psychology at the time because, as we know, Baba Asa Hilyard was on faculty at Georgia State, and he was the last years of his life was when I was in undergrad. So he actually died during my senior year. And if I knew of him the way I do now, I would have clung to him. But I only knew him like a little bit, so I would try to visit the institute that we have for him at Georgia State. So that really impacted me. And so I went on to study Africana Studies. I stayed in that lane in New York, and then ultimately at Temple University. And I studied under Malefikete Asante at Temple. And it's just a dynamism and a transformation that can be done in a matter of years. And for some students, even in a matter of a semester, where clarity, I would say, a shield of imperialism peels back when we are engaged, not only with the material, but with other like-minded people who can direct the interpretation. So that's what I hope to do now. In my life, I completely dedicated to becoming Africana Studies professor, along with many other things, as a major impetus of service and gratitude to how it had transformed my life.
Now, you mentioned and this was stated in the reading of the bio, in terms of this leaning to psychology. And so we understand Africana Studies as a larger, framework, but, to get specifically into psychology, to get into the minds of African people, what made you stick along those lines?
Yeah. And so firstly, now this is my opinion, and other people have different understandings, but subjectively, I understand Black psychology to be one of the most potent subfields of Africana Studies. So I still would say I'm an Africana Studies scholar. That's my main theoretical approach, methodology, and premises come from an Africana Studies perspective. Black psychology is not in contradiction to that. The language, the terminology, the thrust against Eurocentric domination, and the ways that we study and understand reality is the same in both Black psychology and Africana Studies. They're a parody. They mirror each other. But I was more attracted to psychology as an emphasis within Africana Studies, because time and time again, in much of what you read, from even histories of political prisoners, from revolutionary activists and movement leaders, from people from all over the diaspora and on the continent, the literature will reflect that one's consciousness, and even the collective consciousness of a people, really determines the greater outcome of what is possible, or even what is possible in our mind. What is the trajectory of what we see as possible? It starts a certain place, and especially for people in the diaspora, with those questions that are non-tangible, the questions of the mind. So I felt like the language of Black psychology mirrored with Africana Studies, and using the mind and the consciousness of our people as the epicenter of change resonated with me most.
Indeed. And you remind me, like with Asta Hilyard, that was the kind of the bad thing about living in Texas at the time, is that, like you would have to, like, unless someone was really invited to come speak, like in Houston, Texas, or where I first went to school at Southwest Texas State University, a lot of these, kind of powerhouse, researchers and speakers and Africana warriors don't necessarily come through. But if you're in a place like Atlanta, if you in Philly, New York, DC, and even LA, or whatnot, that seems to be like a hub to really meet and engage, and take advantage of that energy. One of the reasons why I moved to Philly uh, later on in my adult life. But for the same reasons that like you got to engage with Dr. Hilyard, but as you state, you weren't necessarily aware or had the same understanding of his work the way that you
Yeah.
do now. And
Mhm.
if had you known what you know now, then you would have, engaged him, a little bit more. And I had the same experience with Dr. Fukuyao. Like he and I would engage either in phone conversations or mailings. Um, but the more and more I got to read his work, I was like, I need to really kind of meet him. But during this time, that's when he, got real ill and sick, and then kind of disappeared for a while, and then some time later he had passed. But it's one of those because of Fukuyao, I make sure that if they're alive and I've read their texts, I try my best, to try to build a relationship and engage with them, because you never know when these giants.
Mhm.
And in the process, I try to, as a inspiration for this program, not try to hog them for myself, but share it, and other people need to know. So, in that same spirit, other people need to know Dr. Flannery.
Thank
Um,
you.
I just want to get, I'm gonna throw some images up, and hopefully you can see them, and you respond to these images. So I'm just trying to see who was it. Anyone in your camp that inspired this lately? Like how should we interpret uh this
Oh,
that
do you have the
happened?
one where they're kneeling down? That's my favorite.
Um, I can pull it up, but go ahead.
The funny thing that you say that is because I have been seeing so many Facebook posts where people are like making memes of Congress and their Kente, and people are just like WTF, etc. Now, I actually think, brace yourself,
Hmm.
especially the picture that's showing them kneeling with the Kente.
Hmm.
I actually think this is a very good um, symbolic action of humility.
Hmm.
And I think that we should receive that, not to say, okay, now we're finished, we're not fools. But in terms of behavior modification, it comes with reward and punitive action. If we're working with a group of people and we're telling them, you need to change, along with saying what's wrong with them, there has to be certain acts where they can feel like, oh, this is good behavior. Let me continue. So I say, keep kneeling. Matter of fact, put that other knee down and beg for our forgiveness. And let's be on the road to reparations. This is a good first step. We have to reward good behavior. They kneeled and they did the whole photo op. Whether it was genuine or not, they passed the bill, for
Hmm.
the first bill at least, on police justice. And then they did the photo op. And then they waited for our response. Now, mind you, Black people do not lobby. We don't give money. So at least what we can give as in terms of behavior modification for these people is tidbits for them to be like, oh, that was good, I can do more in this direction. So I think it behooves us to play it both ways and not just say everything you do is corrupt. The other thing is that I also think that that image where white people were kneeling, well, there was some Black people with the kente and their head was down, and it's sort of this form of reverence, was so unfamiliar to Black people. It was uncomfortable. In the same way, if a bully that has been bullying you all year comes up to you at school and one day just says, "Yo, my bad. Like, I realized that wasn't right," it would be so off-putting and alarming. You don't really know what to do except for to lash out. And so I think that's a natural response after being bullied so long. However, it's also unfamiliar for Black people to see Europeans paying reverence to Africans. And so it might have made us laugh uncomfortably and then begin to say certain things. But I'm against just completely saying any and everything you do is trash, because then we don't engage behavior modification.
Mm. Yeah, I know, like when I log into my Amazon Prime, I'm seeing Black Lives Matter as a banner. And I don't. What else did I go to? Was something like I was just seeing that, like on these popular corporation things. So it's you, like I have reserved comment. I didn't want to go with my first mind, and I reserved comment. I just wanted to see and meditate. How should I interpret this? What's my limits? Because it's just as you said. On one hand, it's like you want them to acknowledge, but how? Like, I'm not saying that they're children per se, but they're young when it comes to collectively recognizing, given the history of our engagement with Europeans,
right?
With acts of collective acts of being human towards African people. So we don't know what that looks like. Nope. And they don't know what that looks like. So we're going to have to kind of work this out, over time. But
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's such a popular thing now. I think that right along with okay, that's a good step, we're moving towards humane engagement. Now, next step after giving a reward, the same way you would with a child or a dog, and I'm not trying to inferiorize them per se, but this is an example people can understand in terms of behavior modification. You give a small reward. Now, they don't get a bigger reward until they do what? It more consistently. So we put out our demands. That would be a next beautiful, great thing. So far as I know, the demands have not been stated as a collective demand on our side. There are different organizations who stated some things. Black Lives Matter has a list. I have a list I'm trying to circulate of like the top 7 things that could be effective right now, given the momentum and what is possible with it. And then we put out our demands. Then if they concede to our demands, then we say, thank you, good job. And we continue in terms until we get to full reparations or somewhere where we're have a reconcilable relationship. And if that is not possible, then, the rest is left to what we know from our history is to come probably war, some type of civil war. And we pray for the support of our ancestors that victory will always be on the side of justice, which I think is with us. So.
Well, speaking of resistance, this leads me to my next photo. And so I know how I feel, so I don't know if you've seen these instances where you have these armed police, patrolling the marches, and then you have African people krumping in front of the police officers. And so, I'm trying not to be the old head and just not liking everything that the young people do. I think I'm getting to that age now in my 40s. But at the same time, I don't know if when they do this, that other people take us seriously. When you see the marching, because I'm a little bit more informed. I go back in time. That's just what I do, and I look for patterns over long periods of time. And, the thing I have to, remind a lot of young people is that these people will kill you, and they wait for opportunities to do so. And if you're going to engage an enemy that is ready to kill you at any moment, then you have to deal with these people differently. But then there's the 90s hip hop head in me, the artist that, thinks that it's just defiant. Like, we can't shoot you at the moment, but, we're going to annoy you by krumping in front of your face while you stand there, frustrated at us in your job. So, I'm like this with it. So I just wanted to get your opinion on this new form, or is it a new form of resistance, in the African world community?
I haven't seen these. I wish there was a video so I can get the full impact of krumping.
Yeah, there's some video.
I know krumping takes so much bodily movement and energy. It's so passionate. I love it. What it reminds me of is possession. In African spirituality, when people go into possession, and there's groups, there's the group, the community that's there to call on spirits to come down and to engage with us in the physical realm. Certain people who have special talents, they tend to either be possessed just by the energy or possessed by actual deity or spirit. And they go into these sort of movements that can barely be replicated by most people, especially depending on their physicality. And it's an expression of freedom. And it's also an expression of the fact that there's a higher power that's present. I think it would be even more impactful if several people were krumping at the same time, the same way Black folks do ring shouts and other kind of dances of liberation and freedom. I don't see it as having to do anything with what the white police force would think of it. I see it as an invitation for one spirit to feel free and released, particularly as they're engaging with a force that has a potential to kill them. And so in any time, even if we're in a club and we're dancing and you're sweating, you start to, many people have the experience where they almost don't feel the floor. They don't feel time. Girls with heels on, our feet don't hurt until we leave the club. I don't know what that is. That is a spiritual experience where you become elevated. And dancing is a part of not just honoring ancestors. It's where you become your ancestors. You invite them into your body. So we know that for the long tradition of African people, we've used dancing, even in Brazil, as a form of martial arts, but really as a form of freedom, enjoyment, and an invitation to spirit to take over the moment. So I'm not against it. I think it would be more powerful, though, if multiple people did it at once.
I think there is some video with, well, I don't, the few that I've seen, there's been multiple people doing it, but they're rotating. In front of the officers. But that'll be interesting to see some video with a group at once, doing it. So yeah. So this is why we have Dr. Flannery on, to bring some sanity to my wild thoughts, because my first instinct was to find Ja Rule so that he can make sense of all of this.
No.
But then the ancestors was like, no, call up Dr. Flannery.
Please don't do that. Don't call Ja Rule. But we have to have a war dance. African Americans, we are our own unique ethnic group. Mm-hmm. We can't anticipate that in time of fury we will look exactly like the European. That would be antithetical to everything we articulate about who we are as a people. So do your war dance, do your chants, So be safe too, as well. I'm not advocating for people to intentionally put their life on the line.
See, I wouldn't mind if I knew that we had our own snipers in the back somewhere. You know, then it's all good. That's just the warrior in me, but I understand. So with having said all of that, you know, what is your, how should I say? Well, kind of two questions. Framing this from an Africological lens, you know, how should we interpret this time? And then secondarily, and I guess you hint on this a little earlier, you know, what should be our collective steps moving forward? How do we take advantage, you know, of this particular time in history?
Okay, that's a monumental question, and I'm going to answer this. Okay. Thank you, Listener. How do we frame this moment? You know, I saw this very weak post by New York Times where they were trying to gather historians around to see how they were going to frame this moment within the context of the history of the US, not even in like world history, very limited framing. And I wasn't really impressed. You know, from my understanding as an Africologist, as an ENIFA, there's a lot going on here. And as people may suspect, it's not succinctly because of the murder of George Floyd. There's a bigger picture. Okay, but we will mark this moment in time, of course, with George Floyd. Now, what I see is that there are waves of things. We experienced a biological pandemic. Now we're experiencing a sociological uproar. And what might come next would be maybe an ecological disaster, so natural disaster. So be looking out. And you're like, dang, 5 months ago, Dr. Flannery said the disaster was coming. But the framing of this moment, in consequence, even if you look at astrology, is in the idea of it being 2020 is happening for multiple reasons. From the sociological perspective, we might say that, okay, people have experienced massive job loss already. So why is it so effective to have these massive protests now? It's because people are free to go out all day. They don't have a job. They don't have the same conservative strings attached to say, well, I don't want to inflame anyone because I have to go to work tomorrow. Of course, with the pandemic, there is a pressure. There's a lot of mourning that's been happening already that precedes George Floyd. Even for non-African people, there has been a collective mourning in our country, specifically for people individually and in their family. And so this sort of outrage and the impetus from a sociological perspective is a buildup, as many people might agree with, of a lot of confluencing of things: bad economy, bad social relationships, death and disease brings revolution. This is not the civil rights movement. Unfortunately, people can only hearken back to that moment. Oh, this is just like the civil rights. No, it ain't. The civil rights movement, as a sociological movement, demanded what? People just wanted to be included into the white social order as it existed. They wanted to be treated as equal, right? Infamously. What people are saying now is we want to deconstruct the system completely. We want to abolish police. That is not the civil rights movement. That is a progressive move forward. Okay. So there is something going on. I also think there is, from a more cosmological perspective, that there is what people have been calling in the astrological community Pluto return. We're in the United States when I say we. is in what is called a Pluto return, which means that the birth time of this country, the beginning of this country, the foundations of this country has made a full circle around its astrological period. And so now it's returning to what it is. You have to see yourself for what you are, and you have to reflect. And it usually, anyone's Pluto return comes with a major point of transformation and revolutionary change. Okay, from a spiritual perspective, through many divinations that have been done in Nigeria and in the United States around what is happening now, people have framed it as especially important to Africans in diaspora, that many of our ancestors are very distraught about what's happening to us, and they don't want us to experience what they've experienced. And so many of them are also caught in spiritual limbo. A lot of times we assume that if someone dies, they're automatically an ancestor. But if you follow actual spiritual tradition, we know that it's not the case. Many people who have not been buried properly, or they die heinous in a heinous way, or there's no one around to remember who they were, they don't make it to the spiritual realm. And so in that sense, there's a lot of volatile energy under the earth because of what's happening on the earth, to the earth, and the ancestors that are under the earth that cannot be released into the spiritual realm. So again, the idea of a confluence of things. And remember, from the Haitian Revolution, it wasn't just that Africans one day got conscious, they did a ceremony, and then the Haitian Revolution popped off. Okay, there was anti-French revolution, anti-French oligarchy revolution happening in France. At the same time, there were rebellions happening by African people in Haiti. At the same time, there was a discord and rebellion happening between the coloreds and the grand whites and the petite whites on the island of Haiti. And when the French weren't hearing their petitions, they were started to petition to France's enemy, the English. And so what happens with the Haitian Revolution, which is a similar confluence, is that multiple things were breaking down at once. And we have the opportunity now to take this moment of uproar and disaggregation of the stability of the power structure and to move efficiently. That's how people have been successful in the past. If we all, even in the body, if you have heart failure, we can still save you. They can still save the system. But if you have heart failure, liver failure, lung failure, you're likely to die. And that's what we hope. I shouldn't say that. This is some opportunity for America to change. There's an opportunity for us to change. So what should we do? We have to have allies in all the spheres, right? We have to have spiritual allies. We have to have human allies. And we have to have a succinct mission. That's why I advocate for people to have a collective, clear list of demands. It don't have to be everything. You know, this may not be the moment for 100% of everything, but it has to be clear demands. And I think that when the collective voice of people from around the world, in this country and so on, in the collective support of our ancestors at this time, if we even dare acknowledge them, many of us don't even acknowledge them, will engage a different reality that we weren't even prepared to imagine. I think this is a perfect time for this type of discussion because many people didn't see the revolution coming or opportunity for it to come. Even in my lifetime, I'm like, okay, maybe 30 years from now, there'll be a massive revolution. But when we have white people on TV talking about white supremacy and stuff like that, you know, it's just like, oh, this is so strange. This is an opportunity for us to demand reparations, for us to demand disbanding police, for us to demand $1 million payouts to family members who have lost members of their family as a result of excessive police force. This is a time to demand transparency on police who have a historical misconduct, which Congress actually passed. And we need to demand resources for all HBCUs and Black Studies departments and other epicenters that allow conscious transformation in all people. So,
Now I wonder, see, even though I didn't go to school at Temple, because Dr. Conyers was there at the University of Houston, a lot of the Temple school was hired there as far as Africana Studies. So this is how, I got introduced into, of course, the Africological frame and methods of interpreting history and things of that nature. And so, this, like I wish that, many of us had the opportunity across the country to be able to view in these, the situations in these types of lenses. And because the ultimate question, like, I'm not one for, how like people say, I'm a Marxist or something to this nature, like identifying, with one individual. But if I did, if I had to, I would say I'm a Wilsonian man, meaning a blueprint for Black power, Amos Wilson man, and the way that he, frames the conversation in terms of the gaining of power in a very Afrocentric way. And I just wish that a lot of the conversation that I'm hearing had this component, like not just simply dismantling the system. How do you get power so that you can resist any other powers that try to, diminish your quality of life? And, that's something that I wish was part of the conversation and the demands. So not necessarily, we know that they're not going to concede power that way. It's going to have to be taken. But at least, like, we should have demands for them, and then we should have a list of demands for us, that we implement for ourselves, to be able to take advantage of opportunities like this in the spirit of, or a major aspect of the journey being the sustaining of power, of getting power, and not power for power's sake, like we want to get an empire and, write hieroglyphs on buildings and stuff like that. But
that's your dream, a star. Okay.
yeah, but
Yeah.
our own hieroglyphs,
Mhm.
which I did a presentation at DIOP one year, talking about the African American Adinkra project.
Yeah, I remember.
Coming up with our own signs and symbols. So this is part of the power, playing structure. But
that's a fascinating comment. I'm really going to say with that, actually. I like that you said that as we have demands for the foreign power, we should have demands for ourselves. That is really profound. I don't want people to miss that you just said that. And that is most important because what happens after the revolution? A lot of revolutionary theorists only develop ideas up until the point of departure from the enemy, but have lacked imagination for how we exist on the other side. And even in the Bible, even in some of these old texts, people say in the Black church, or that Martin Luther King said, I'm going to reach the mountaintop, or I've seen the promised land. And so when we develop our promised land, what type of people will we be on the other side of a revolution? What type of people will we be as a free people? Which the African American imagination has often been eclipsed, even in the text written that supposedly are on our own behalf. Well, we rarely have people discuss African Americans or people in the diaspora as people who are not captives. So our demands for ourselves, I think, uh, it would definitely have to start with the individual and move out. Everyone has to have their own demands for themselves and not be, if you don't trust yourself, you can't trust the movement. So if you don't trust that you can change your own habits, why should you articulate that, 25 million people need to wake up? How dare you? So, I always say if you can do it in yourself, and I'm a proponent of modeling and not just speaking. And if I earn my PhD, I don't come from some high middle class background or anything. And I forced myself to change my entire worldview, to change my um, spiritual paradigm, to literally live in a new reality against the odds. And people alongside of me and ahead of me have showed me the way. Then now I'm capable of putting the gas mask on the person next to me, like on the airplane. Once people have worked on their own challenges, this is your New Year challenge. In fact, Yoruba New Year was a few days ago. The challenges for yourself cannot be lesser than the challenges for the community. That's unfair. Whatever you are willing to do for yourself is what you can project for the community. Then we can come together in a democratic way and say that we are now willing to accept ourselves as a people collectively. We won't fight over colorism. We won't fight over or dismantle collective identities. We are willing to build an economic structure on our own terms by ourselves. We are willing to have Pan-African relationships that are healthy. We are willing to separate, if necessary, from the geographic body that the Europeans have colonized in some way. Things of that nature. I think that's so important, Asara, that you said that. It's going to be the cradle of the conversation of what will take us forward.
You've spoken. You've added spirit into the conversation at several junctures of the time that we have been conversing, and I'm wondering, and maybe this is an offline conversation, but what juju do we need right now for Donald Trump, who is going to start his campaign, reopening his campaign for presidency and re-election in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
What? Jesus Christ.
At
Okay.
basically roughly the 100-year anniversary of the massacre of Africans in that space and time. In this space and time, given the spirit of this. So I'm just, of course I can't say certain things, otherwise the FBI will be tracing the IP address this, and then I got to deal with some other stuff. But I'm just saying, what juju can we muster up that the mics don't work, that the stage falls, that they run out of gas coming, how should we interpret the audacity? Is it audacious?
Yes.
For him to start his campaign in Tulsa, Oklahoma in this day and age?
Let me suggest that I think it's absolutely intentional that they are going to the site where the federal government dropped bombs on one of the most wealthiest communes of African Americans when they were forming their own independence in terms of wealth in this country. That is a ritual. Let's not forget that whites have rituals too. You're going to go to where we destroyed you last to make your point, to show a sign of superiority and a conquer positionality in relationship to the social atmosphere. That is a ritual. Now, how do we protect ourselves and how do we destroy the enemy? I'm going to give very practical response.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been said anyways in the year reading about what we should do from the Ifa tradition, that the ancestors are one of the most potent. Sometimes it's a variety of Orisha, but in this case, the ancestors are the most potent for Africans in diaspora to be successful. And anyone, regardless of your actual practicing religion, everybody has ancestors, okay? Even just by genetic construction. Anyone and everyone can do this. You don't have to be an Ifa. You have to make a pact with your ancestors and you have to give an offering to them. And then you have to detail what you need them to do. This is most potent when we do this collectively. An example would be, I'm going to call 5 homegirls. We're going to set a time to do an ancestral ritual in the backyard at my house, right? Just giving an example. What we're going to do is we're going to offer the ancestors food, same kind of foods you eat, cakes, fruits, meats, whatever, on a huge plate. So we're going to take it to a tree. We're going to pray, pour libations, and pour gin over this offering. And if you can, smoke tobacco into the offering. Ancestors love gin. They love tobacco. So you could go buy Black and Mild or whatever and smoke it into the offering. And you pray with fervent commitment. And you call on as many names of ancestors, both in your lineage and our community ancestors like Amos Wilson and all the others, to come down and fight our battle. That is one actual ritual you can do. Another one is that people, this goes back to psychology. Your Ori, that's what they say in Ifa, but your Ori is your head spirit or your consciousness, in other words. Everyone has their own Ori. Everyone is born with their own personality, their own unique imprint on the world. This is also known as Ori in Ifa. Everyone has to pray individually to their Ori. But again, if people come together collectively and they touch their head and they focus on the spirit of their own head and they pray for the strength, the courage, victory, etc. And you offer your head offerings as well, typically things that are whites or clear, to have enlightenment and clarity of all things. Then people in relationship can manifest things. That's the spiritual side of ritual. The physical side is what people have begun to do: decapitating colonial statues, protesting, using their physical bodies as in spaces to show a quantitative and qualitative effort towards change. Okay. And the last thing that's very important in terms of these rituals coming together is literally raising your own consciousness. And you've talked about this just previously, and I've talked about this in terms of don't ask other people to do what you can't do for yourself. That means that if I have access to information for strategies of change, I need to be sharing that, and we need to be in agreement. Some books that's good for people to read to elevate their consciousness so they even have a language for what would be a good thing to talk about, to pray about, to manifest. This new book that just came out by my brother, Dr. Onachi, called Free the Land. It's about the new African independence movement, which is still alive and well, but it made its largest impact in the late 60s and the 70s, all the way through to the 90s, where African people were demanding the Southern 5 states succession and their own government. Okay, and there's rationales for why some people changed their name. There's rationales and conversations in the text about what culture are we interested in. This book is called Free the Land. It just came out this year. Another book, I like Thomas Sankara Speaks. It's sort of an anthology of a lot of essays of his, and it's on the Burkina Faso revolution. Okay. Also, of course, Black Power by Stokely Carmichael, Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Soledad Brother by George Jackson. All right. So we have to read the literature because people have been here before. Just because we have been unsuccessful or short-sighted in our revolutionary struggles doesn't mean the revolutionary theoretical framework is false or has fallacy. And so if we have the opportunity to advance things that people have already thought through, that cuts short us not being precise. If we're in the moment of all the haywire, like, okay, what are we going to do when we put together a plan in a matter of a month to change an entire trajectory of a country? That's not smart. So Malcolm X used to say when he trained people in the nation that if you've done no investigation, you don't have permission to speak. And so we have to have that type of discipline with the spiritual and physical, which is easy to do. But the thing that takes a little bit of time, but it's worth our while, is to raise our political consciousness collectively so we're not making mistakes. And so we have a precise and aggressive plan to be successful.
In that same lane, in terms of resistance, kind of feeding back off of the last question, I wonder if that's retaliation for what you see on these steps here. I mean, the streets here. So for those who may not be familiar, the mayor of DC, Sister Muriel Browser, has painted or had, city workers paint Black Lives Matter leading up to the White House, on the main street going to the White House. And they have even named the street Black Lives Matter, leading to the White House. And so it just says something, about, the levels and the types of resistance and being in those positions that you can demand, even if, it's symbolic in many respects, but just to let them know that, while I look at it in the same way that while Trump is going to, a place of chaos, for African Americans in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a place of strong and deep-seated, emotions and memory for us, that in the modern day, we're taking the fight directly to, the White House and their current seat of power, and letting you know that, we're here and we're going to be here and you have to deal with us. But what is your take on the whole spraying of Black Lives Matter? And I heard that it's supposed to be sprayed even in New York, in all the boroughs. Like there's this one street to be taken, and that'll be placed, in New York. So we'll see if that happens. But your take?
Yeah, I think it's cool, but I think it's more propaganda for white liberals to raise their consciousness than it is for us. We know Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
We've been saying that. But it's important for the white, if they are allies or whatever, abolitionists, to also have their own propaganda media for their communities, knowing where they are as a collective group in their consciousness. And so I think this, again, is something I would say, good job, Europeans, with that, and continue to make the efforts in the way you know how, because they're very good for marking things, putting flags on things, putting statues. That's a part of their cultural tradition. So that was very significant for them, even though Black people are like, I don't care. Where my money at? Look what you did to my uncle. What about all these people who are still mass incarcerated? But if we understand from the European cultural tradition that for them, marking something in the physical way is significant. We understand that's their propaganda tool for people they're trying to rally, which may have a positive effect on our overall goal. So I wouldn't discourage it. You know, what would be more powerful from a more African cultural thing is to not just say Black Lives Matter on the street, but to name the street after an African ancestor so that people are actually calling that person's name every time they go down the street.
Now we got to remember that the mayor of DC is a sister, so
Yes,
she's
and
the
she's
one. Yeah,
operating within a Eurocentric
yeah,
paradigm as best as she can. Bless her.
yeah. So that's what it goes back to. Like I'm afraid that this will be a missed opportunity because the vast majority of us have not gone through that Africana Studies training. So as you said at the beginning of the conversation, there's an experiential level of knowledge. But once you start reading all those books that are behind you to your left, you know, it does something to you in terms of your awareness, in terms of the language that you use and how you frame conversations, and even influences the depths of the goals that we seek. So, you know, and because, you know, you have, you know, I don't know how many of us is there. I think you said around like 25 million, you know, African Americans. How many of that number, you know, have gone through this type of education, you know, formally or informally, to be able to even think on that level, you know, to read, you know, to rename that street Fannie Lou Hamer
Absolutely.
Street,
Right.
you know, in the first, like that wouldn't even come through their mind. Yeah. So, you know, it just lets me know that for me, being realistic, I don't expect much because of the nature of the conversations that are being had. So I know I haven't saw it or seen it yet, but like Oprah has a panel discussion and a number of, you know, brothers and sisters, you know, talking about the current times. And there's only one brother that what's his name? Ibrahim, is it Kalindi?
Ibram
Kendi, yeah. He's on the panel. But that's the only one that I can recognize that I think would
say something that could be worthwhile.
Yeah. And so, you know, you have these people with those platforms, these large platforms, but the kinds of people, like, I would love if just someone could get in Oprah's ear and get Dr. Amamazama on the show. I know that's a wish. I might have to do some serious sacrificing to get Amamazama on, you know, a platform as large as what Oprah has. But I'm like, those key individuals, people like you, people like Dr. Wade Nobles, Brother Adisa, who we had on the show recently, you know, and a host of other folks who I feel would elevate the conversation. You know, unfortunately, they're under the radar because those people aren't in that space to even look, you know, and know to look in that direction for people like y'all. And that's what concerns me, that, you know, that where the conversation could go will not go there on a larger scale because, you know, and so I try my best to get it out there, but, you know, it's going to take a lot. So,
yeah, I think in all societies in human history, there have always been people who have specialized knowledge in different areas that wasn't representative of the larger body. So I don't think we have a unique configuration to say that some people, what will Oprah do? To say that some people will know these things and everyone should know all of what these some people know, that's really not consistent with human history. What would be more of a ideal is that the average Black person would have buy-in to the experts that reflect our own interest, as opposed to deferring to athletes and Oprah, etc. So at minimum, if we saw our experts who have a long history of saying things that have been proponents of our own well-being, if we had buy-in for what they were saying, open ears, we rep them, we represent them, that is actually good. That is what democracy is anyway. I vote for this person based on their record and hoping they will do the right thing. The confusion is not that everyone doesn't have the same level of consciousness, is that because of cultural misorientation, we have lended our buy-in and our democratic voice to people who do not represent us. And so that there's still ways that that's being molded by social media and by people on the grounds. And I think that we'll have some agency in transforming the national consciousness, but especially now.
Now, I know Dr. Flannery personally, and I always, tell her how jealous I am sometimes of her and Dr. Asante, because every time, we don't talk all the time, but when we do, it's like, yeah, I'm on my way across the waters, somewhere in Africa, and it's the same thing with Dr. Asante. He's never just really in place. But I want to kind of turn the conversation back more personally for you, and having the opportunity to go to the continent and engage in a transformation, an internal transformational process. Some will say, an initiation, so to speak, in an indigenous, African system. Like, what has that done for you personally, and how has that shaped your approach to life and even the work you do, even on the academic side?
Right. So thank you, Asar. That is true. I'll be like, can you hit me on WhatsApp instead? Because I'm about to board my plane. I appreciate you.
Love that.
I hope that my words will actually encourage other people to be curious into other to African spiritual traditions, because for me, it was a paradigm shift. And I think if you could go in an optimal order, it would be to engage and accept the African worldview on an intellectual level, and then to move into African spirituality as sort of this sort of beyond our primordial sense of understanding of what is real and our potentiality as people and spirits. Sometimes you may not have a level of consciousness, and then people, it's usually not Black people. I think I've engaged with maybe a lot of Latino people or Caribbean people who have had the African spirituality, but not like a Pan-Africanist vision. And so they get into the spirituality, but they don't use it as a decolonial force. So my experience was that I was already in Africana Studies and stuff, and then I entered into the spiritual paradigm, which completely advanced what I already knew, not contradicted. And so what happened was, when you enter into a spiritual system, it's like you're a baby again. It's like relearning a whole nother way the world works and your ability to engage. And so my choice tradition, or Ifa, chose me. So that's the one I initiated in Nigeria. So I started to learn things that not only empowered myself, but that that forced me to engage what is ethics and what is immortality and what is power in different ways as an African person. And what I've come to understand is that, oh my God, this is not just ancient Africa and contemporary in the diaspora. The ability of people to access spiritual wisdom is a real and it's alive all over the world, which is the other part of it. Some people say, oh, you're so bright to be so young. I didn't read everything. I pray before I do my talks to say, ancestors, tell me what to say. And I would not take full credit that everything that I've articulated is just my own thought. And so also as an intellectual, as a scholar, I understand that if I can tap into something that is epic memory and that is an engagement with all knowing, oh my God, that's way more incredible than the time in the physical realm that I would have to read the next 100 books. And so whether it's Vodun, I see someone in the chat talking about Vodun, and Vodun actually comes out of Ifa in the Odu, Ogunda Meji, and Ifa is where Vodun was basically birthed. And so it's very close to Ifa. Sometimes even on the continent of Africa, people have said, you know, Ifa is like more softer or like not scary, and then like Voodoo is like scary. I don't know. It's the same stuff, people. Look, Voodoo, Ifa, Kisi, Akan, Zulu practices and how they manifested in the diaspora are all very similar ways that we engage something beyond our primordial self. For me, it also allows an extreme level of predictability. So in Christianity and Islam and Judaism, people are encouraged to have faith. Why? Because they are not given a system of divination to get a hard answer on any of their questions. So you must believe. In Ifa, we say you don't have to believe Ifa. You don't have to have a faith practice, because you can just ask through divination, are you going to do this? And the spirit will say yes or no, or maybe. So there's no wondering, you know, so it's a very practical way of living. So I make better decisions in life because I can always be like, yo, should I meet with this person? Should I say this thing? Should I wear this? Should I be present for this? Etc. to my own divinities and get clear answers that are consistent with my own path. The other thing that's more powerful about African spirituality that will empower us as a people than the modern religions have been able to do or to capture, besides the level of predictability, resourcefulness, practicality, and actual empowerment, is that in Ifa, we believe that anything can be changed. There's not like a super hard determinism. Even in the Orikis, there's like, even Orumala almost committed suicide in one of those narratives in the stories of Ifa. And he went to a Babalawo and said, you know, there's nothing left for me. My life is over. I'm going to hang myself. And they said, wait, let's do a sacrifice. Let's see. And so the idea is that no matter, especially for an oppressed people, right? No matter how bad it looks, you are not destined for darkness. We won't tell anyone that you were born a sinner. I've never heard nothing more ridiculous in my life. And that really stings people in Christianity, that they're born thinking that they are already incorrigible, that they are already distant from the divine light, that they have to do everything they can and they will never succeed at being more divine than what the little crumbs that they were born with. That is false narrative, okay? That is destructive. What empowered people would tell all of their community that you are born with infliction? That sounds like racism to me. And so I would deter people away from buying into any system, even though if you don't do Ifa, that it tells you that you must be in perpetual servitude, that you're born with, already born with infliction, and that there are a certain level of possibilities that you may never reach. That is not liberating theology.
You remind me, again, I was having the conversation earlier today with Dr. Alexis Tangon, a native of northern Ghana, part of the Dagara people who exist in northern Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Cote d'Ivoire. And, we're having the conversation about the importance of the cosmology of African people in order to understand their ways, because the culture reflects their sense of cosmology. And you'll see, as we say, as above, so below, in all areas of life in many of these indigenous cultures. And, I brought forth an author by the name of Jordan Ingobani out of South Africa, who he has passed. So, was an Amazulu, part of the Zulu people. And he wrote a book called Conflict of Minds, kind of detailing the differences between, European thought ways of being and the Bantu, or what he called the Sudic, after the Sudan, just calling all of, Africa, Sudan in many respects. And so he talks about this Sudic ideal. And so he talks about, of course, and I'm bringing him up in along with Dr. Tangon, because in both traditions, there is this sense of, when we're talking about God, you're talking about existence itself. And everything is just a manifestation of the divine. And the study of the world itself, no matter what area it is a study of the divine. And because, to use the English term, God is existence itself, is everything and all things at once. It is the ultimate value, to use the language of Jordan Ingobani. And that, the human being is a portion of that value. And saying all of that to say is that because the way the cosmology is framed, everyone is born valuable. And this is one of the things that when studying the Abrahamic traditions versus the African traditions, that there is a very staunch difference. Because in the African systems, especially ones that, believe that the human being is just a fragment, a small, percentage of the greater immense infinite divine itself, is that you're born valuable. You have an inherent value that is to be respected in by all living things. But you have to earn your worth and value in the Abrahamic traditions. So, that's in essence what you're saying, in terms of, being born in a sin. You're already born at a deficit.
Right.
And if you do this, and this, then you may be worthy, saying of having life abundantly.
And you won't even know if you're worthy until
you die.
People accountable.
Exactly.
Like, bruh.
Yeah.
That's an excellent supporting point, because a lot of the modern religious traditions, as they've come in more recent history, have a really grand focus on social political control. And so how do we know that? So what's common in like Judaism and Islam and Christianity and stuff is how one behaves. And there are standardizations for how one should behave, which is predicated and dictated by social law, right? In Ifat, it's not to say, of course, that ethics don't matter, that there's no standard of ethics, because having Iwa Pele, a good character, is one of the most divine principles. However, when you take on as African spirituality, each individual is given their distinct destiny, their distinct taboos. There is no singular taboo that applies to all people. So you may not supposed to be drinking, and I can. Or, if you fornicate, that's like your most deadly sin. But I'm chilling. I'm a child of Shango. I can eat whoever I want. That empowers me, you know. So just I've been using really provocative examples because there's so much in our minds from the European perspectives on what makes one a good person. And when you initiate and you have divination in African spiritual traditions, it's not unclear. They say in your life, you shouldn't do these 5 things. Anytime you do these 5 things, you're going to encounter challenges. And when you don't know your taboos as a person on earth, this is how people end up becoming reincarnated and reliving and just stumbling through, or someone may be like, I always have the same problem, or I always have the same conflict in my relationships. And if you only have sort of a sociological or psychological way of understanding it, you may be completely remiss in being able to transform that thing in your life. It may be as simple as you're not supposed to wear the color red ever again. And every time you wear red, something bad happens or you get in a car accident. You haven't made that connection because you don't have that paradigm for understanding reality. So all these spiritual, if we simply say, even if you don't believe in anything, like you were articulating, like all things are connected, there's spiritual energy, the stars, everything is connected, the cycles of life and so on, then we have to believe that there's some spiritual relationship that's unique to each spiritual being that will either enhance or create conflict in our personal lives. And so this is how we understand initiation. The importance of initiation is not just to be a fancy priest. Initiation and spiritual traditions from Africa have to do with individuals. So we don't have these broadcasting things of what no one should ever do this. That's very rare. You're going to hear that in African spiritual paradigm. And so it also allows people another level of freedom. In African spirituality, smoking and drinking alcohol is not bad. Okay. In fact, those are one of the most sacred things we do to propitiate the Orisha and the ancestors. It's a completely different way of thinking about things. You know, like I said earlier, pour gin on that thing and blow tobacco smoke for the ancestors. They really enjoy that. And so a lot of the things that we've learned are so disgusting about Black people. They dance, they be sweating, they be talking loud, they drink, they smoke. You know, these are very sacred things to us.
Indeed. I know, like, one of my taboos, if I remember, is like I couldn't wear like plaid, you know, and you know, and so I was like, you know, there goes my OG gangster career because that's part of the uniform, you
That's
know, you know, but yeah, so yeah, I understand all of that, you know, in the nature, but it's you know, I'm just reflecting because it's just fresh on my mind, the conversation that I had with the elder today, and you know, it kind of reinforces this notion that to really get back to our sense of self prior to the introduction to the European and the Arab and their way of thinking, you really have to unlearn years and years and years of social programming, to where you almost have to think the opposite in an African system, like, and it's hard for people to grasp. So just like when you mentioned earlier, you know, when you talk about faith, like when I engage in conversation, they ask, well, what faith are you? And I'm like, there's no equivalent to a faith where you know you have to believe and stuff like that. So that's still colonial language, you know. But I understand what they mean, and then I have to reframe it to get them to start thinking like an African person. And the elder was informing us, at least from the Dagara perspective, and I can back that up in other traditions, that, you know, when you're thinking about like deity, so to speak, and ancestors in their, you know, like they talk about, you know, the sky and the earth, you know, or rain and the earth being the primordial human ancestors. And so like in his text, you know, he's talking about how, you know, an ancestor isn't just your human, because everything exist in one big house, is what they say. And, you know, you evolve from these primordial substances. And those are your progenitors, earth and sky. So, you know, we go all the way back to even that in terms of the, not necessarily hierarchy, but, you know, the linear progression, you know, in terms of what ancestors are. And so when you're talking about these deities, so to speak, as being, you know, these forces or these agents that transfer life to life, you know, in many respects. And so it's kind of hard because, you know, one of the things he mentioned was like, you know, these aren't necessarily things of worship, but, you know, personifications for ways of knowing and pedagogy, so to speak, in terms of the deities, but they are to be engaged in a way, you know, in a very practical way. And so the practicality and just the you know, getting the European mindset, you know, we would say Eurocentric mindset, you know, out of the African is a daunting task, but it's one that takes time. But it can be done nonetheless. But just saying all that to say that we have to think differently in order to grasp these fundamental concepts.
That's one of the main premises of Afrocentricity. Sometimes people who may be unlearned in Afrocentricity have come across reinterpretations or colloquial conversations around it, and they think that Afrocentricity is, I've heard this so many times, just wearing African clothes and so on. People may describe Afrocentricity in the way that is actually Africanity, which is either a conscious or unconscious level of expression of one's cultural expression. Afrocentricity, which is a part of the conscious engagement with these things and our detachment from Eurocentric thinking that really incarcerate our minds, incarcerate our dreams, requires someone to have a conscious and concerted effort around their own agency and self-identification as an African person. A conscious and concerted effort around their own identity, okay, and agency as an African person. So that means that my judgment of whether someone is Afrocentric, which is sort of a measure I use for if they at least begun their pathway to detach from Eurocentric bondage, is not just based off what t-shirt you have on today, which many people have misidentified Afrocentricity as. It has to be something that is practiced and that has an identification that we can locate in the way you talk, your language choice, and the way you defend African people and the way you defend yourself and the things that you're able to imagine for us as a collective, you know. And so we've had many great figures even before we had the term Afrocentricity, and we continue to have people who we have this deep intellectual tradition and a deep activist tradition around folks who have openly been, you know, assertive in African agency, you know. And so that's really a first step. I'm going to stick with that, you know, one's consciousness, which is underscored in the Afrocentric idea, is the most important thing that you can take ownership of. Okay. Your own consciousness. And
so not to cut your wisdom, but so the Democrats wearing the kente cloth, you know, scarves and shawls and things of that nature, that wouldn't be considered Afrocentricity, would
absolutely not.
Okay. I just want to.
You just want to put it out there.
well, I'm sorry, continue. I interrupted you.
Yeah, that's not Afrocentric, but I still appreciate them. Thank you. Keep it bound, keep bowing, and keep doing more. Um, so no. It's the same as if I go to Japan, I might buy a kimono because maybe I'm like, wow, I really respect um what I've learned about the culture here, whatever. You could wear other people's clothes out of reverence, respect, homage, or just that out of pure vanity or what have you. So that would be really the most belittling thing to use as a measure of what we've developed as an intellectual and radical progressive idea in the world, you know?
Indeed, indeed. Well, we are coming up on an hour and a half, and just want to thank you for, coming on and engaging with my audience and the world in general, folks who will see this later. And just want to kind of open it up for any questions in the for those of you who are watching live and are in the chat rooms. So if you have a question real quick, I know there's a time delay, so I'll give it a few moments before I close it out totally. But just wanted to make sure that I said thank you for coming here and enlightening us and giving us something to ponder and to frame the conversations in the way that you have. And so I know that
so great in lining up these lecture series. This is the perfect time to deliberate on what we'll make decisions around. This is great.
Thank you. I had to catch y'all while the COVID-19 had y'all. Because Dr. Ife, I will call her tomorrow, and she will be in South Africa somewhere. Like, I had to catch a plane real quick, so I had to get y'all. Take advantage of this moment. So, I know we can word it a little better, but I'll post the question. But you know what he's trying to say.
Do we get the Jesus? So I'm going to interpret the question as, how do we kind of move away from the evangelical Christians and so on that are existing in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the work of the Africans on the continent. It wouldn't really be meaningful for someone from the outside to come in and say, what are you doing now? As they say, what are you doing now? So what is happening and what we can support in the diaspora is for, in my opinion, especially since I've seen this with my own eyes. So the person who stated that is not making this up. Is for us to share consciousness with those folks who do practice their own ancestral religion about engaging Christianity as a form of colonial domination. And many of them are conscious of it. Some people may not activate around it. Same way here. Some people may just be like, well, I'm conscious. I got to do my own thing. Y'all too much work. And so because a lot of times fundamentally in African spiritual traditions, there's not a lot of hard lining, in fact, we could say by technicality, like you could be a Muslim and say you worship Ifa, and people wouldn't see that as a contradiction on the African side of things. But of course, in Islam, they would be like, that makes no sense. So some people have had a lot of liberties with their fellow community members and their family members on the continent being super evangelical, because they don't see it as clearly as we do as oppositional to the ancestral practice as an imposition. They just see it as like, why are these people not praying to their ancestors? They could do both. Okay. But in a political way, I think as we've shared consciousness and we've had cross-pollination with people like Kwame and Nkrumah and so on, and people brought this back to their communities, we need to encourage, because diasporic Africans have been on the forefront of Pan-Africanism and a lot of revolutionary ideas that have kind of sometimes manifested slowly on the actual continent. We need to encourage them to, in the same way they think about economic exploitation and colonialism, encourage them to be have more propaganda around African spirituality as a form of decolonization, because that language is not used around Christianity and Islam as much on the continent as it is out here. So some people I've known, priests who have made comments, oh, they built this big church, they keep taking up space. So they have some consciousness around it. But they may not see it as a political necessity to actually, remove Christianity altogether. Well, I see differently. I support the comment that was made.
Indeed. Hold on one sec. Ifetunde Fayemi asks, how can we use African tradition to heal from the effects of the Ma'afa, therefore Kizungu Zongu, tornadoes of the mind, Kikongo, coming from Nobles 2015. Take it from there.
Perfect. One of the major things, and this came out in this year's Odu, I said this, one of the major things is not to assume that just because you die, you become an ancestor. So sometimes people are like, why are we going through so much if our ancestors have so much power? Which they're not understanding that there is a relationship, a kinetic relationship between people who are physically alive and the spiritual entities that exist outside of physical bodies. What I'm saying in terms of the Ma'afa, I want to underscore that many of our people who have improper burial and who have died heinously have not made it to the ancestral realm. We can't call on them for help. That's our job. They don't magically always make it to the place that they're destined to go. What we can do in the living realm to heal one way from some of the angst of the Ma'afa is to reconnect to our ancestors and to actually empower them. Sometimes we think of it as unilaterally, like everything above us empowers us, but we have to engage to empower our own Orisha, to empower our own ancestors through collective practice and collective worship. That's step one. Once we have connected with our ancestors, the struggles and the wars that we are facing, we have support to engage them. The other thing about the Ma'afa is that we should still seek reparations. Now, I just wrote an article about this. Now, there are many ways to interpret reparations. Many people understand reparations as really the physical monetary exchange between the oppressed group and the oppressor. However, we understand, and people have engaged thinking around reparations as also repair. Anyone can do repair, which means that a part of the reparations project is our own. How do we repair ourselves from the trauma that we have faced? We are responsible for at least 50% of that. The repayment process is really just to repair the human relationship between the oppressed group and the oppressor. It would be a symbolic form of us saying, okay, we forgive you, thank you. But the payment of part of reparations actually doesn't repair the group of people who have faced traumatic injury. That is on us, and we can't expect the oppressors to fix that for us. So we have a spiritual component of reconnecting with the ancestors. So we have divine light and knowing what we need to do next at all times. But then we have to do our own reparations project. And I think a part of that is consciousness. Of course, I'm about to be on that. Raising your one's consciousness through study and through dedication. But also, again, and Asar talks about this in some of his other works, deciding as a collective group what we will culturally prioritize, how we want to represent ourselves in world history. What names will we use to replace subjective oppressive language that has colonized us so we reappear in the world? Maybe what flag will we have, etc. These two major things our own reparations project and our ancestral connection, I think, is a major way to repair the damages of the Maafa. It is not in the hands of the European. It's ours, because both of those things we can do without them.
Indeed, indeed. Have this question here. Brother Sar, what does Dr. Flannery think is the best route for us in understanding the metaphysics of our spiritual systems and how they effectively can be applied to help us in the here and now? And there was a follow-up on that. He says, and to clarify, metaphysics, I mean particularly the use of Aku or other spiritual metaphysical entities to affect change in our society, culture, and world. So I don't know if that adds more clarity, but that's the questioner's commentary.
Very good. Thank you so much. Understanding our metaphysics, I think, is a twofold thing. So I think I was trying to assert earlier that sometimes if you just try to do spirituality in isolation, you can miss the mark on really, if you have a colonized mind practicing African spirituality, you're not going to even think of certain questions to ask the spirits about, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the two critical things in enhancing and engaging our metaphysical power is to disengage from European worldview and to study on the intellectual level, physical level, the practices of our people that we see patterns in over time. Okay, our own culture, our own worldview. Then when you apply spirituality and spiritual science to that, you can also be studying books on a variety of things: hoodoo, voodoo, Ifa, Santeria, Candomblé, and so on. And you really need an elder to engage the practice and the science of the spiritual component, because much of what the spiritual system is not written in books. A lot of the Europeans have written down some of the things in the books. You'll see it's not many Africans who have written about it, because by and large, it's still an oral tradition, and that's on purpose. So, of course, the secrets of a people and how they worship their God and how they call on their God to do certain things on their behalf is something that you're supposed to be trained under particular elders. So if you seek out people you know, you email me, I can connect you to people. Or if you already know people in tradition, the way to become learned up in African spirituality is in community with practitioners. There's really no other successful way to do that. It forces you that you can't be an autodidactic in science and African spirituality. You can't go off into a cave and be like, okay, I studied for 10 years. You literally can't. It just doesn't exist that way. You have to study with people, which is also a worldview principle that the religion is not alive until it's done in community. So I would definitely say the cultural piece, us as African people, the political piece, to inform our consciousness to a certain degree, in combination with being in touch with spiritual elders and community members so they can train you as a practitioner.
Mm-hmm. What you just said reminds me of a saying in South Africa. They say "Umuntu, Ngabantu," or "Umuntu, Ngamuntu, Ngabantu," and that is, a person is a person because of other people. And that speaks to why you can't be locked in the cave by yourself.
We can't be on our Platoism, like,
yeah, because the whole point is to, well, not the whole entire point, but a major aspect of it is the development of your character to engage and then serve the community. So if you have no community to test out your everyday, experiences and things, then you won't really get it, because you have to be in service.
That's right.
Of the people.
I'll make another point about that. That's an excellent point, because I mean, it's like a metaphor, and this is also my critique of online learning. But, so there are some differences in watching someone cook to learn how to cook on TV and to be in the kitchen. Why? Because there's certain things that cannot be captured technologically, like the smells, and the heat of the kitchen. And so likewise in spirituality, it would be antithetical to say that all you have to do is to use your intellectual mind and read a book to understand spirituality, because that's antithetical to the point. That is not something that can only be encapsulated by the limitations of our conscious mind. It's something much greater than that, that you have to experience, you have to practice. So in African spiritualities, we don't say like, I believe in this. We say, I practice this, right? And so you can't practice and you can't learn much of what is basically not even written in text, but you can't learn and you can't practice your spiritual tradition alone. Even certain rituals, literally you can't do it alone because it requires different people to carry out different things. But what you can do, and I promise you this will work, if you're just starting and you like, I just need to engage some kind of way and I need it now because it's hella war out here. You need to, any and everybody, whether you initiate it or not, any and everybody can have their own ancestor altar in their house. It's very easy to construct. You just need to have some table or something, put a white fabric on top. You can have one or more clear glasses of water. You want to have, if possible, actual pictures of your deceased biological relatives. Now, we love our fictive kin, but in African spirituality, you can't put your play cousin on your altar. It's disrespectful. You have to put your biological dead relatives there. So you have your water, your whites, the pictures, and a white candle to burn. And progressively, you may add more things, but that's the foundational element. And then when you start to create sacred space with this, you may add flowers, money, tobacco, gin, things of this nature. Your ancestors will see, oh, they've created a portal for me, so I'm going to visit. Ancestors are not like ghosts in horror movies. They don't want to scare you. They won't impose. If you have not invited them in, and this is just in regular Black tradition, you can't come to my house if I ain't tell you you can come over. Don't just show up like you have rights. The ancestors respect that in terms of the human being. So if you have not created space for them and actually said, I invite you, it's not likely that you're going to get a lot of spiritual messages just off random. Now, a lot of times our ancestors have saved us from death, but the practice of hearing their voices and engaging with them and creating a relationship like you would with a person, you have to invite them and you have to do it regularly. You have to talk to them like people. They are people. They're grandma and them.
Indeed. Well, this will be the last question coming from Adisa.
Oh my God, Adisa, what are you doing? Okay, let's see.
He asked, it may, because I have the banner at the bottom, it may take a second to.
It says, what role does the sacred feminine have to play both at the psychological, sociological, spiritual, and cosmological level? Thank you. Big ups to Adisa. I really look up to him. He's an amazing Black psychologist. I know he was on your show before. Can you leave that up there? Because that's a complex question. The divine feminine is extremely important, as you might suspect that I was going to say that. So let's see it in the order that he asked. At the psychological level, it's important to honor the divine feminine regardless of the body or gender formation that you are in. The divine feminine exists in all things. And in fact, in the Ifa creation story, the world was incapable of coming to fruition, even with many Orishas and Babalaos present, without the presence of Oshun. And so that was a Riki that was given to us in Ifa creation story, kind of like say the equivalent to Genesis, I don't know, to remind us and to let us know that unless we include women, that none of the things that we attempt to do will foreclose. So at the psychological level, if we haven't embraced that idea that nothing we will do will be successful without our engagement with the divine feminine, then we're missing a big part of the transactions that's possible and even the opportunities that are up to us. Divine feminine energy falls on all people. So, for example, and even if you're a man, of course, like you can be initiated into Yemoja, which is like the queen mother of all children and stuff, who's known for being pregnant, known for producing children, known for protecting children. She's a huge divine feminine force, Yemoja. So men initiate into Yemoja and they become a patron of her their entire life. That may be their trajectory. So we see in the spiritual tradition, there's not this sort of like alignment that whatever your born gender is has to align with your spiritual duties or something like that. Like I, as a woman, initiated into Obatala, which is an old man. Okay. So the same with my point here with the divine feminine is that we all have to engage or nothing will come to pass. Okay. Just keep that in mind. Sociologically, if we say not even just at the spiritual level, but in terms of humanity and what's best for us, the divine feminine gives all of us tools to learn from. The divine feminine teaches us how to nurture people, which men and women do. The divine feminine teaches us how to restore people, how to feed people. The divine feminine teaches us how to fight like hell. You know, that's not just a male thing. If someone messes with a baby bird, that mama bird is coming for your head no matter how big you are. Okay, these are aspects of divine feminine. At the sociological level, we have to engage women. We have to engage women's scholarship and things that may exist outside of female bodies, but that have feminine aspects that allow us to be successful. We can do this in our libations. We can do this in practice, and we can do specific feedings to divine feminine energies like the Iyami, which are very important this year. Iyami. This is a collective of women. I guess you could say Orisha per se. This is a collective of women known as our earth mothers. Sometimes people refer to the earth as a feminine entity. This collection of women don't care who you are. They don't care if you're a patron saint of them. If you cross them, they will destroy you. They have an intense energy. And we know that the energy of the earth is very volatile right now, which means the Iamis are at work. If we do not propitiate to the Iamis and say, please, Iami, please don't harm me. Please, in fact, protect me. You know, you might suffer the hand of the wrath. If we don't translate that into relationships with our mothers, the Iami who may be protecting them will protect them instead of you. If you transgress women, especially elderly women. And that kind of is a combination of my sociological and spiritual explanation of the importance. We've seen the divine feminine evident in all African traditions from the beginning of time, from Egypt to now. We don't see that consistently in European practices. That's cool. Europeans are still working on their own development. What we know as African people is that if we're going to be successful, we have to have parity. We always have to have symbiotics, harmony. And to do that, you have to have the intense and conscious effort to have balance between, even within your own self, your feminine and your masculine. All people hold both things. I hope that was sufficient, but I know Dr. Adisa is a genius. So.
Indeed. Well, they're still pouring in questions, but I'm not trying to have you here.
We could take another one.
Let's see. Whose question is worthy to be asked? Now, let me see. And some of y'all are repeating the same question, and that will be my last question, before closing out for good. So we'll get to that. Let me scroll down some more. Where was that one question? No, that's a question for me. I know I'm missing. Okay, I lost it. I don't know where it is now.
Any general ideas that keep populating?
Yeah, so I'll do this. Well, no, someone asked. Well, someone asked, if we don't have any photos of some of our ancestors for altars, what could be used?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If you don't have any photos, that's okay. If you have their names, you can write their names on pieces of paper and put that on your altar as much as you can. And ancestry.com has been very helpful. I used that way early on, many years ago, to discover some of my ancestors that I didn't know. So you can use their names, okay? And minimally, you just say when you pray, though I don't know the specific names of my ancestors, I call on my foremothers and all my forefathers who have my best interests and who will propel my destiny to be present with me. That's the best we can do at minimum, but definitely you can just put people's names down.
Indeed, indeed. And the number one question in one way or another is, how can we engage Dr. Flannery? Does she have a YouTube page? What is her contact information? So that kept popping up.
Oh,
I said I would ask that last.
is there a way for me to type this? I don't know. I would say
Hold
I'm
on.
not.
You can. Do you have on the right hand side a little
A chat
icon that says
thing.
private chat?
Yes.
Type in the private chat and I will type it in and make a banner so that it comes up. So we can go. Well,
really, I'll just say this too. If you Google my name, one of the first things that comes up is my work page, which has my email that I'm about to give now. I do check this one the most often. Also, I am on Facebook. My Facebook name is the same here. And unfortunately, I'm not advanced enough to be on Twitter and things, but that's my direct email. And you can use my name, Ifetayo Flannery, to Facebook me, Facebook friend me, to ask questions. I'm on there periodically, more so now because we need to be accessible during these times. And I'm so grateful. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Asar, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. I always think about making sure to say that I do feel that it's a privilege to be able to study and live amongst my own people. And so I take great pride in doing that and engaging with you all. Thank you.
Thank you for enlightening us and coming on the program. And so as we can see, the people are really enjoying the message that you and the ancestors have given us, today. So, I don't take it lightly. The connections and friendships that I've been able to develop and the insights over the years. And, I'm all about sharing and making sure that these perspectives are out there somewhere. So if I have an opportunity to make that happen, I'm gonna make it happen. And so I thank you. I thank all of you who are listening live, and of course, all of you who are catching us on the archives. So you can do us a big favor, by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video once it is complete. So share with your friends and colleagues, and more importantly, critically engage the conversation and expand it in your own personal circles. And so this is how these ideas spread, by you continuing the conversation when the cameras turn off. And so I appreciate everyone for listening, and I will keep you updated on future guests. We have let me go to my banners real quick so I can show. So, speaking of that Temple School, Dr. James Conyers, he will be on the program soon. We're just trying to solidify the date and time. A very powerful Africology researcher, and one of my he's a teacher of mine in other ways, but by the time that he came to the University of Houston, I had already taken all of the courses that I could legally take in African American Studies at U of H, because it was just a program then. And so, but Dr. Conyers would allow me to come sit in his classes, even though, I was a computer, science, major then, and was in a totally different department. So I still got my Africana Studies in, even when, I could not take any more classes. And that's all due to Dr. Conyers. And so when I will inform everyone when he comes on. And then we're going to have our good brother from Sierra Leone, who teaches at Howard University. And so, one of the many things that we'll discuss is his work ethic, and the kind of work ethic that allows for you to get 3 master's degrees and 5 PhDs. And so, because he has, PhDs in a variety of subjects, so he has a PhD in linguistics, one in computer science, one in economics, one in mathematics, and one in political science. And so he has a wide range of expertise, and we want to tap into all of that. And so we're solidifying his date as well. And then we have some more powerful people that I will keep you abreast to. So thank you once again, Dr. Flannery. I like to call her Dr. Ife, but Dr. Flannery, for again engaging us. And I will see y'all next time. So as normal, I will end with an A and B selection from the choir. So y'all be safe in these Corona streets. Still wear your mask and wash your hands frequently. And I will see y'all later. Peace.